This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Here is the latest on Iran. Things are different. This time it feels different. Bloomberg reporting that Iran's government said late Monday that they have quelled all the protests, but Bloomberg also reporting the rioting is anything but under control. The BBC reports Iran warning Trump that if the United States intervenes, Iran will retaliate. NPR reporting Iran warned Israel not to get involved. This, as CNN reports Donald Trump saying, if they, the Iranians, start killing people like they have in the past, we will get involved. That doesn't mean boots on the ground. That's what Donald Trump said. The Wall Street Journal reports more than 500 protesters have been killed so far, but that number is believed to be much, much higher, some putting it as high as 544, with 109 Iranian security officers reportedly killed by protesters. There are reports, and I'll get to this later, Time magazine is reporting that some academics have put the death toll at 6,000. There are reports of 10,000 people, protesters, detained. Some are putting that number at 20,000. The first hanging of a protester is reportedly scheduled for Wednesday of this week. CNN reporting late Monday that Iran's foreign minister said his government is prepared for war with the United States, but is also open to talking with the United States. Donald Trump telling reporters that Iran called the Oval Office asking to begin negotiations. Trump saying his peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, has been talking with Iran's foreign minister for several days now. Carolyn Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, telling reporters that what you're hearing publicly from the Iranian regime is quite different from the messages the administration is receiving privately, and I think the president has an interest in exploring those messages, unquote. Al Jazeera reporting that Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, accused the West of distributing weapons to protesters, and former Speaker Newt Gingrich calling on the United States government to take real action to dismantle the Iranian government. Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman was asked by CNN if he would support some sort of military intervention to help topple Iran's government. Fetterman said, you have, quote, you have that poisonous regime now in spiral, so why wouldn't we want to support that and those brave protesters? Washington Representative Pramila Jayapal telling CNN that any military action in Iran requires congressional authorization first, adding that military intervention, quote, could actually inflame tensions against the United States. Well, Iran has been considered a destabilizing force in the region, but certainly not like it was 12 months ago. It's much weaker than it was 12 months ago. It is also sitting on vast oil reserves, as you all know, and you all know that's what Trump is thinking about. Right now, he's thinking about that oil the same way he's thinking about Venezuela and Venezuela's oil. Venezuela in 2007, just like Iran in the early 50s, took control of its own national resources. They nationalized their oil, resulting in the toppling of their duly elected leader and the CIA installing the Shah. You all know that story. Venezuela nationalized its oil. We now see what happened. Iran nationalized its oil. I think it was 1954. I think it was 54. And we saw what happened. And we're beginning to see in Venezuela, it's not so easy for the United States to take over a country and reclaim the oil reserves that once supposedly belonged to ConocoPhillips and Exxon. The jury is still out as to whether the oil companies can ever restore Venezuela to its pre 2007 oil production levels, with the CEO of Exxon, which claims Venezuela stole about $1 billion of its infrastructure from them when they nationalized their oil. The CEO of Exxon telling Trump it's just not worth it financially to go back into Venezuela. And Trump may find out it's not worth it trying to run a country like Venezuela or Iran. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is, which is why actually going into Iran and seizing its oil, something Trump constantly talks about because it sounds hyper-masculine till you actually have to do it. And you're reminded, oh yeah, America isn't good at winning these things. We can destroy countries, but we're not too good at winning these wars because you're going to need boots on the ground. You're going to need to be an invader, which, I don't know if you've noticed this, but for some reason, countries don't like getting invaded by the United States, especially if we're going to steal their oil. We know how deadly it was next door in Iraq for our soldiers, and we weren't even taking Iraq's oil, something Trump, with absolutely no understanding of what it takes to wage war, he constantly says, I can't believe we didn't take their oil. He always says, I can't believe we invaded and didn't take their oil. He says that because he's an idiot. Despite all the bluster, I think Donald Trump is about to find out that invading Iran or Venezuela, boots on the ground, for their oil is not only going to be unpopular, but impossible. Besides, Trump already said the biggest threat to America is the enemy within. Why waste our military hardware on foreign countries like Iran or Venezuela when there are way too many deserving homegrown Americans who need beating up? Philip Loft, in his briefing for the UK Parliament, writes that the demonstrations in Iran that we're seeing right now began on December 28th of last year, with the Ayatollah saying he was willing to confer with protesters, discuss their grievances, but warned that rioters, quote, would be put in their place. Iran, since the fall of the Shah back in 1979, has a long tradition of their theocratic leaders allowing some protest, which is why the current leaders insist everything is under control. They've been here before with demonstrations turning into riots, resulting in hundreds killed and mass arrests. But for some reason, this feels different, a lot different, especially with 109 Iranian security officers killed in the past 2 weeks. We're now going into the third week. According to Philip Loft's report for the UK Parliament, Iran's current president, Masoud Pezeshkian, was elected in 2024 on a platform that included protecting the rights of protesters. Again, they allow some protesting. Civil unrest on a limited basis is believed to relieve some of the pressure. It's not encouraged, but it's tolerated. That being said, human rights, they're out of Norway, Human Rights reports that since the joint Israeli and American bombing campaign back in June of last year, Iran has arrested 21,000 citizens, accusing them of espionage. Philip Loft's briefing for the UK Parliament also says last year the government executed 1,500 people. 109 Iranian security officers that we know of have been killed since the protests began in late December. I'm bringing that up again because it is starting to feel different this time. During a pro-government rally on Monday, those slain security officers were called martyrs, and 3 days of national mourning for them were announced. Meanwhile, Iran's population of 92 million has been cut off from the rest of the world for nearly 6 days after the government shut down Iran's internet almost entirely. Some now saying the entire country has at best 1% connectivity. Elon Musk has been providing internet via his Starlink, but Time magazine says he's charging for it. So when he gave internet to Ukraine and Venezuela, it was for free. Time magazine reporting that Musk is charging Iranians for Starlink. Nevertheless, enough Iranians are taking advantage of Starlink to provoke Iranian security officials to begin breaking into homes and seizing that equipment. Despite the government-imposed blackout, reports are coming out of Iran, reports of bodies piling up, reports of a 5-year-old child shot in their mother's arms. Eyewitnesses report security forces are now using military-style weapons on the population. This is something new for Iran. Not Minneapolis, but new for Iran. What is making these protests significantly different is the deployment of Iran's conventional army, known as the Artesh, to quell the protests. When previous protests got out of hand, like back in 2022, the Iranian government relied on its law enforcement command and a paramilitary group that's part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. This time is different. The actual army is now attempting to restore order, suggesting these waves of protests are different. Now, the numbers have been changing throughout the morning. Human rights activists were putting the death toll so far at 544. The Associated Press is putting it at 646. But Time magazine puts the death toll in the thousands. Let me read you this because it's very disturbing. Okay? Starting with reports from a handful of Tehran hospitals, an informal expatriate group of academics and professionals calculated that protester deaths could have reached 6,000 through Saturday. The calculation does not include bodies carried by authorities, not to hospitals, but directly to morgues, such as the hundreds laying on the floors and parking lot of the Karazakh Forensic Center outside the capital. According to a social media post, the scene shows only bodies killed on Thursday night. Time magazine says the scale of the killing appears to dwarf anything previously seen on the streets of Iran. In one city in Isfahan province, Nafjabad, the death toll was 35 for Thursday night alone, and the protests have reached all 31 provinces of Iran, a nation of 90 million, it's 92 million, with 100 cities with a population of 100,000. And there it is. Ahmad Ahmadian, a U.S.-based activist involved in smuggling dishes into Iran, satellite dishes, said at least 50,000 Starlink uplinks, those are Elon Musk's, that's his company, are there. 50,000 Starlink uplinks there, though they may not be operating because of subscription fees. Time magazine writes that unlike Ukraine and Venezuela, Elon Musk has not made Starlink free in Iran. The Associated Press now reporting that Donald Trump took to social media and declared that he will impose a 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran. The tariff appears to be directed at China, which is Iran's biggest trading partner. According to the CIA World Fact Book, 36% of Iran's trade is with China. So what do you think? Is this starting to feel different? Iranian citizens are taking to the street for many reasons. Initially, to protest the devaluation of the real, to protest economic conditions, and of course the oppressive conditions under this theocratic regime. The economy is in really bad shape. Chants of death to Khamenei have been heard. I've even seen video of protesters setting fire to official posters of the 86-year-old leader, and they weren't wearing masks. They were willing to show their faces, unlike ICE. Protesters are angry over the Iranian government's decision to spend more on weapons and paying for it by cutting social welfare services. Why does that sound familiar? At the same time, the government is considering a hike in taxes in order to pay to rebuild the country after last year's war with Israel and the United States. Al Jazeera wait a second, can't they just give a tax cut to the rich? Doesn't that pay for everything? Al Jazeera reporting in the past 7 months, Iran's middle class has completely collapsed, plunging millions into poverty. So, we're getting conflicting stories. Some are calling this Iran's biggest protest in nearly 3 years. Others say it's more widespread. They're comparing it to the 1979 revolution that ousted the Shah and installed the current leadership. The Shah's son, exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, is said to be encouraging protesters to take to the streets while at the same time urging them to be resilient. For example, to avoid their arrest during curfew, he's urging Iranians to chant from their homes starting at 8 p.m. Suppose you have to get up early for work. Noisy neighbor. I'm calling the police. What started primarily with students has now spread to shopkeepers who joined in the protests, angered by Iran's economic decline. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, accusing protesters of rioting because they're in the thrall of America and are acting out in order to please Donald Trump. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, accusing protesters of attempting to provoke enough violence to justify Donald Trump's intervention. Al Jazeera reporting Iran's foreign minister now saying he's open to diplomatic talks with the United States, said he wants to avoid war with Trump, but isn't afraid of it. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and the nation's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, accused the West of provoking these riots. America and Israel are responsible. But others say it's not the West. The protests stem from what sparks all revolutions, the cost of bread. Food prices have reportedly spiked 72% in the past year. The Guardian reporting that overall inflation is above 50% year over year. In the December issue of Foreign Affairs magazine, Karim Sajapour wrote that Iran's 92 million citizens make up the largest country in the world that is totally isolated from Western banks, foreign currency, and investment. He writes about the isolation the protesters feel, and it's growing worse as the government throttles back the internet, even when there's no unrest. This as more and more countries treat Iran as a pariah state, refusing to allow Iranian visitors. He writes that daily life is one of power outages and water rationing. He writes, quote, "The regime's enduring slogans, death to America and death to Israel, but never long live Iran, make clear that its priority is defiance, not economic development. The regime's enduring slogans, death to America and death to Israel, but never long live Iran, make clear that its priority is defiance, but not economic development." He also writes, Tehran has some of the most polluted air on the planet. Well, maybe instead of burning American and Israeli flags all the time, they might want to boil those flags. It's better for the environment to boil American and Israeli flags. Wait, it's Iran. Is that a Persian cat? I mean, Iran is Persia. I see the pollution. Does that look like a Persian cat to you? Look, this is what a Persian cat looks like. I got to tell you, that cat is an Israeli spy. That's not a Persian cat. In his briefing for the UK Parliament, Philip Loft writes that America's capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro now poses even more economic challenges for Iran. The two countries became trading partners out of necessity. Both were forced to live under economic sanctions imposed by the United States. But with Trump's air and naval blockade in and around Venezuela, Iran now finds itself even more cut off from the world. Loft writes that after Israeli-America joint airstrikes in June damaged Iran's energy infrastructure, Iran became dependent on Venezuela for oil. This despite Iran's vast petroleum reserves that the United States and Great Britain have been trying to control since World War II. Economic sanctions are obviously taking their toll on the Iranian population, especially after sanctions that were lifted, economic sanctions were lifted by Great Britain, Germany, and France back in 2015, but were reactivated last August in response to Iran's continued lack of cooperation with UN inspectors. You might remember in 2015, President Obama signed the Iranian nuclear deal. He was joined by France, Germany, Great Britain, the EU, and the United Nations National Security Council. The deal arranged for the West to lift economic sanctions against Iran in exchange for Iran agreeing to allow round-the-clock UN inspections of all its nuclear facilities, thereby guaranteeing that their nuclear enrichment program never manufactures weapons-grade uranium. But Donald Trump became president in 2017 and pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, reimposing the economic sanctions. Joe Biden, after becoming president in 2021, failed to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. In fact, he ended up imposing more sanctions on Iran as fighting between Israel and Iran intensified. Claire Mills, in her briefing for the UK Parliament, writes that in August of last year, the United Kingdom, Germany, and France joined the United States and reimposed economic sanctions on Iran for its failure to allow UN inspectors into their nuclear facilities. But wait a second, back in June, what about Donald Trump declaring victory? Remember the joint operation with Israel in June to bomb Iran into compliance? Didn't work. Can't win. As much as we want to believe, you can't win by bombing a country. In the lead up to last year's bombing campaign, UN inspectors complained Iran was not allowing them in. Now, for any country that fears Iran becoming a nuclear power, this is cause for alarm. Iran is believed right now to have stockpiles of enriched uranium with 60% purity, far higher than what's needed to power a nuclear power plant. Weapons-grade uranium requires a 90% purity. Nuclear reactors to generate energy for the people, well, that only requires a 5% purity. Iran, according to UN inspectors, before and then after Trump's airstrikes, Iran still remains the only non-nuclear power in the world possessing enriched uranium this close to weapons grade. Again, despite last June's airstrikes, Iran still refuses to allow inspectors into its key nuclear enrichment sites. Again, if you're a nation that doesn't want Iran to become a nuclear power, this is cause for alarm. It is generally believed that Israel, the United States, others in the West, and of course Saudi Arabia, they would like to topple the current regime because Iran is funding a proxy war in Yemen against Saudi Arabia and a proxy war in Lebanon and Gaza against Israel. But the question is, what comes after this theocracy if it's toppled? Well, there is the possibility of more theocracy. The current Ayatollah's son is seen by some as his possible successor. But there is also the possibility that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard could assume more control, reversing the power dynamic where the clerics, for the first time, would only be nominally in charge, forced to answer to the military. The return of the Shah's son is also talked about in the West, especially among those who conveniently forgot that his father's oppressive pro-Western regime created the conditions for the 1979 revolution, and we helped. We trained Savak. Thank you, Norman Schwarzkopf. Well, that was his father. Was it Norman Schwarzkopf's father? I think Norman Schwarzkopf's father trained Savak. I'm not sure. It's either, I'm pretty sure it was Schwarzkopf's. I just wanted to lose the entire audience on that. Schwarzkopf led our troops into Iraq during the first Gulf War. There are reports of protesters inside Iran now chanting, "Long live the Shah." Apparently, America isn't the only country with amnesia. The Washington Post reporting chants also include, "This is the last battle, Pahlavi will return," Pahlavi being the Shah's family name. The Post also reporting protesters can be heard chanting, "Reza Shah, God bless your soul." That would be the son. The Post profiled Reza, the Shah's 65-year-old son, who lives in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., in what the Post describes as a mansion, but not quite a palace. His father, the Shah, died in 1980, by then in exile, and it is generally believed the family squirreled away billions, most of which was confiscated by Iran's current government, but the Pahlavi family supposedly still kept plenty for themselves, enough so the Shah's son doesn't have to work. He's in his mid-60s, and he has spent his adult life, he tells the Washington Post, fighting for his return to what was once called the Peacock Throne. I'd like that job. How come I don't get that? How come I have to work? He told the Post he will move back to Iran, quote, "at the first possible opportunity. My job," he said, "is to lead this transition, to make sure that no stone is left unturned, that in full transparency, people have an opportunity to elect their leaders freely and to decide their own future." You know, just like it was with his dad. So what comes next? The Shah's son? New clerics? A more potent Revolutionary Guard? Those are three possibilities. The fourth is nothing happens. The current theocracy stays there. There are also Iranians in exile besides the Shah's son, and they would like a shot at coming back and assuming power. Problem is, they've been absent, just like the Shah's son, for more than 40 years, and will most likely be seen by too many Iranian people as out-of-touch interlopers who are puppets of the West. I don't see how the Shah's son returns. The current Ayatollah is 86 years old, and as I said, things look like they're changing, but they might not. There are moderates inside this current government hoping they can ride out this storm like they did in 2022 when confronted by the massive women life freedom protests, which lasted more than 3 months. They were sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini after she died in police custody while being held for violating the nation's dress code for women. Those protests saw more than 500 demonstrators killed and nearly 20,000 detained. The average age of those arrested was reportedly 15 years old. So 2022, the women life freedom protests, a lot of people thought, oh, things are changing in Iran. They didn't. And up until this morning, we were not completely sure if the current protests had risen to the level of violence or are becoming as big a threat to the government as the women life freedom protests in 2022. But, and this is why I'm spending so much time on this, as I mentioned earlier, Time magazine reporting the death toll may already be in the thousands. Some academics are putting it at 6,000. So in 2022, 500 protesters were killed, and they didn't bring in the army. They now have the conventional army restoring order. This is a crisis unlike anything the current government has had to face. Now, these protests can get much bigger because this is now the most vulnerable the Iranian government has been in 40 years. Israel killed the country's top generals and scientists last year, and that American-Israeli joint bombing campaign in June shattered Iran's image as a military power in the region. Although Hezbollah won't put down its weapons in Lebanon, and the Houthis are still firing from Yemen missiles into the Red Sea and Israel. So, what comes next? The fear is palpable, not just inside Iran, but for the West. As George W. Bush learned after illegally invading Iraq, just because a country's leadership is despotic and deadly, the world may be better off than the alternative. Better the devil you know, as we learned in Iraq. Better the devil you know. Moderates inside the current Iranian government are banking on the West and the protesters deciding better the devil we know. So moderates believe, right now, moderates inside Iran believe they can ride this out the way they did in 2022. And over time, with the Ayatollah aging out, they might be able to bend a little towards modernization. This is a situation that is, I don't know how this plays out. But here's a novel idea that somebody should tell Donald Trump. Instead of invading oil-rich countries, why don't we work on getting rid of fossil fuels? That might be the best investment we can make. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you to Bob and Mila, who keep the conversation in the chat room civil. Please leave a comment. I read all your comments. Please subscribe to this channel and my newsletter. Hit the like button so I remain in your feed. What else? Okay. think that's it. Thank you for listening to me.